Riot Games is about to change the fighting game genre forever. If you saw me on Twitter or on YouTube freaking out about the League of Legends fighting game and don't quite understand why, I want to explain exactly why I'm so excited about this game in this video. Firstly, it's not because of League of Legends. I've played League before, but I don't really have a connection to the characters or the lore in the same way that a lot of League of Legends fans do. The value that comes from these characters for me is just looking at them and saying, oh, that character has a cool design, and I'm familiar with their movesets, but I'm not particularly passionate about the franchise. In case anyone's curious, if I had to pick a favorite character, it'd probably be Lux or Kayn. But the real reason to be excited about this game is actually something I've talked about before. Fighting games exist in this strange niche. Regardless of why or how we got here, fighting games are a niche genre swept away by thriving genres like MOBAs, FPS, battle royales, auto chess, MMOs, RPGs, and I could keep listing off genres that are more successful than fighting games, but I think we understand the point. Fighting games have a few problems working against them. Those problems require modern solutions, and yes, fighting games have done a lot to step into the modern era, but they are still so far behind the times. For example, Mortal Kombat 11 is the first NetherRealm game to feature a legitimate ranked mode. Every mainstream fighting game developer is still releasing yearly or bi-yearly titles for $60 or $40, and I don't have time to go into the details for this last point, but those same developers have outdated controls and inputs that are simply unintuitive for a new player. Oh, and netcode. NetherRealm and Killer Instinct have certainly done some impressive things, but the vast majority of fighting games are plagued with unacceptable netcode that we shouldn't have to talk about in 2019. Right now, there is kind of this imaginary ceiling of success that fighting games can reach, because there are only a certain amount of people that play fighting games. That ceiling is about to be raised to a level that most people won't see coming. I've said it for a while now, there are realistically two companies that can raise that ceiling: Blizzard Entertainment and Riot Games. One of those two companies was going to be the company to redefine the genre. It just had to be one of them because of reasons we're about to discuss, but it ended up being Riot Games. But will Riot actually succeed at this endeavor? And just to be clear, we're not talking about succeeding in the normal sense of the word when we talk about fighting games. What we're talking about is if Riot will be able to manage to make the most successful fighting game ever. I think they have a realistic shot of doing it. Firstly, we have to define what the target audience for this game is, because initially you might think, well, it's a fighting game, so the target audience is fighting game players. Wrong. Riot Games won't ever publicly say this, and none of their marketing will suggest this, because it would be a PR nightmare, but they don't, and they should not care about catering to the core fighting game scene, the FGC, because they already play fighting games. And if Riot succeeds at reaching a different demographic of player that isn't the FGC, well, a lot of the FGC is going to follow right behind, because there's going to be a lot of attention on the scene and people will be interested in it because of that reason. The fighting game community will be the easiest market to target, so there's not a lot of reason for Riot to go out of their way to target them. If Riot can pick up the quote-unquote casual players, God, I hate that phrase, and build a new core player base of non-traditional fighting game players, the traditional fighting game players will follow suit, because there will be a ton of players to play with, constant updates, and an incredibly active tournament scene, and even more reasons that we're about to talk about. But how do we target that? Oh gosh, I don't want to say, you know what? I'm not saying casual anymore. I'm not saying casual players. I'm going to say non-FGC base. How do we target the non-FGC base? Well, there's quite a few things we need to get right. Firstly, we need appealing and already established characters. League of Legends benefits from being one of the world's largest game franchises, so they've got plenty of fan favorite characters to draw players in with from the original MOBA. Netcode. Netcode is incredibly important not only for us, players who are used to fighting games, but it's also really important for someone trying out a fighting game for the first time. You want that first experience to be as smooth as possible, and if you can make it feel like it's a local, or at least as close to local as possible, they're going to come away with a really good first impression. And after all, you can only make one first impression. While we don't have anything specific about the netcode of this game, because of course it's very early in development, we do know who is making the game. Riot Games, a company who lives and breathes esports. They will prioritize prioritize net play for this game, and furthermore, we also know that Tom Cannon is working on the game. If you don't know Tom Cannon, I didn't know what he looked like before, but I knew him by name. He practically invented rollback netcode. If you've heard of GGPO, which stands for Good Game Peace Out, you know how good the Cannons are at making netcode. GGPO is known as the most stable network interface thing that we have for fighting games, and this guy who made it is working on this Riot game. I think it's pretty fair to say Tom Cannon plus Riot Games is probably going to make for the best netcode we've ever seen, and I'm totally ready for that. Gameplay is incredibly important, but maybe not in the same way that you would expect. High-level gameplay isn't exactly what we need to worry about initially for this League of Legends game, but what they do need to worry about is how it feels to someone who's never played a fighting game before. In traditional fighting games, to throw a fireball, you do 4 different inputs, technically. You do down, down, forward, forward, and then punch, which creates a quarter circle motion input. This feels so unintuitive, especially to a player base who's been playing MOBAs this whole time, where everything is a touch away from being used. Now imagine that MOBA player coming over to play this League of Legends fighting game and having to do a motion input on a keyboard. It would feel ridiculously unintuitive. Thankfully, Tom Cannon realized this was a problem when he was making Rising Thunder, and I'm sure that's going to carry over into the League of Legends fighting game. Along the same lines of gameplay, we also need systems that are universal to help understand each character. One thing that I think would be very helpful is some type of trait system that gives each character a unique thing, but everything else kind of be universal. This is actually kind of what League of Legends does, and it looks like that's what the fighting game is doing based on some of the UI elements we have access to from the small amounts of gameplay we've seen. And we could also see that they already have keyboard in mind based on that same footage where we can see the person who's working on the game is using a keyboard to play. So they've got characters, they're probably going to have amazing netcode and intuitive gameplay, but why is this a Riot Games specific thing? Why couldn't any company just do this? Riot Games, and Blizzard could have done this as well, but turns out it's Riot Games, does bring something special to the table. Riot is a modern company heavily responsible for the surge in esports of the last decade. They also have a built-in community of players that will be willing to try out the game. Along with that built-in player base comes something incredibly special, something incredibly valuable: influencers. That's right, Twitch streamers, YouTube personalities are so important for marketing games in the modern era. Fortnite would not be in the position it is today if it wasn't for people like Ninja, Dr. Disrespect, Shroud, and Myth. Look at League of Legends. The League of Legends card game just came out, League of Runeterra, and it has 151,000 viewers. That's 151,000 viewers that are checking out the newest Riot game through their favorite personalities. Now imagine those same personalities checking out the brand new fighting game. Imagine that fighting game having everything we've talked about up until this point: simple controls, good netcode, and even maybe a ranked mode. In case you're not aware, influencer marketing is a real thing. Companies pay tens of thousands of dollars, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars, to get these influencers to play games or review products on Twitch or YouTube. You can read tons of different articles about why this type of marketing works, but the short version is trust. When you watch a Twitch streamer or a YouTuber, you're forming what has been referred to as a parasocial relationship. If you need a short explanation as to what that is, it's basically a long-distance, one-sided relationship. Once you've formed that relationship, it's easy to trust that person. It's the reason why I'm cautious about taking any sponsorships on this channel, because I want to be very confident in a product before I recommend it, and because of parasocial relationships and the way that they work, I don't want to recommend something that I don't believe is really good. This type of marketing is certainly going to happen naturally for the Riot fighting game, because the viewers of these Riot streamers will want them to go try out the new game, just because it's a new Riot game. And that type of marketing will be even more effective in this case, because I absolutely guarantee this game will be free to play. I mean, obviously it hasn't been confirmed yet, but the previous game that the Cannons were working on, Rising Thunder, was intended to be free to play, and Riot Games has a history of free-to-play games. So I would be shocked if this game itself wasn't also free-to-play, which is another huge advantage Riot has when it comes to this market. Fighting games have been incredibly stubborn about going free-to-play. We've had a few games go free-to-play, but they're not built from the ground up to have free-to-play models in them. Look at League of Legends. It has an incredibly well set up free-to-play model. There's a rotation of free characters that you can play. You can then purchase other characters with either in-game currency or real-life dollars, and this will be even more effective in a fighting game because generally you have one main character. If you just start releasing skins for characters, people are going to want to buy them to be able to customize their characters. And we can tell that that's probably going to be in League of Legends, the fighting game, because they're using 3D models, which is going to make it a lot easier to implement those skins. Now, the main reason that other fighting games don't adopt this type of free-to-play model is because it requires a lot of investment. It requires a lot of initial capital. To be able to make a full fighting game and then on top of that, also make a bunch of cosmetics, well, it's expensive. Especially if they intend to release characters frequently, which I believe they will. For those and a bunch of other reasons that I could spend all day talking about, Riot Games doesn't need to worry about the FGC at all, because they're going to build something special here. I'm sure the League of Legends fighting game will be at EVO, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal to Riot. I think Riot's going to run their own world tournament like they already do, similar to the Capcom Cup, but more Riot-y. Maybe even at the League of Legends World Championships, or whatever they call it. I think they just call it Worlds. Maybe they'll just be a side tournament for this fighting game until eventually the fighting game is as big as they want it to be, and then they can run their own events for the fighting game. The game would be silly to not capitalize on this existing market. By being free to play and adding characters from League of Legends, adding popular skins like the KDA skins and many more arcade skins, things like that, I seriously can't stress how important it is for the game to be free to play. If I want someone who's never played a fighting game before to come play a fighting game with me, what I need to do is, well, first of all, they probably need a PS4. Second of all, they need to go buy the game, and now they need to learn it with a bunch of complicated mechanics and probably awful netcode. When this game comes out, playing a fighting game with a friend who's never played one before is as simple as, hey man, click this link, go download the game, and come play it with me. I would be shocked if Riot Games does not manage to succeed at what they're trying to do here. So if you've seen me gas up this game on Twitter or on YouTube, this is why. Fighting game history just changed forever.